It began like any other ordinary day, sunlight spilling across classroom walls, sneakers squeaking on polished gym floors, and the quiet hum of a world unaware of the darkness about to unfold. But beneath that calm surface, something sinister was brewing, something that would blur the line between innocence and evil, between fair play and fatal betrayal. And before the day's end, that quiet world would tremble, drenched in blood, haunted by the sound of a single gunshot that refused to die. In one corner of America, a 6-year-old child walked into school with a secret no one could imagine, small hands clutching a weapon meant for war. In another, the blinding lights of NBA arenas hid a different kind of violence, a corruption so deep it reached the very heart of the game itself. This isn't just a story about crime. It's a descent into the cracks of a system where trust dies slowly, where justice whispers too late, and where greed and negligence breed horror in unexpected places. A teacher, moments away from tragedy, trying to shape young minds in a world that had already lost its own. A player, once a hero, now a pawn in the Mafia's deadly game of chance. 2 lives, 2 worlds, bound together by the same thread of betrayal. As the clock ticks, the gun is raised. As the crowd cheers, the bets are placed. The scream of a classroom collides with the roar of a stadium, and America watches, paralyzed. This is no coincidence. This is the anatomy of corruption, the rhythm of tragedy playing in perfect, terrifying harmony. Tonight, we peel back the mask of normalcy and stare into the face of the unimaginable, a world where innocence bleeds, loyalty sells, and justice comes crawling through the dark. 2 stories, 1 truth, and it all begins here. The morning of January 6th, 2023, began with the kind of stillness that hides catastrophe. The sun had just crept over the rooftops of Newport News, Virginia, casting a soft golden light on the windows of Richneck Elementary School. Inside, laughter echoed faintly through the halls, the innocent chatter of children starting another day. But inside room 11, something sinister was already taking shape. A quiet darkness lingered there, unseen yet alive, waiting for the moment it would shatter that morning peace forever. Abby Swerner, a first-grade teacher known for her patience and warmth, sat at her reading table. She smiled as her students traced words with their tiny fingers, sounding out vowels and giggling at their mistakes. She had no reason to fear what was coming, no reason to suspect that within those small desks and crayons lay the seed of a nightmare. The door creaked slightly, a sound she'd heard 1,000 times before. But this time it carried weight. Her eyes met the quiet, brooding stare of a 6-year-old boy, his expression unreadable. His hand was buried deep in the front pocket of his hoodie. "Come join the group," she said softly, unaware that the next words she'd speak might be her last. Then a sound shattered the calm, a sharp, metallic click, the kind that makes the air freeze. Abby's eyes widened. The boy raised his trembling arm, a gun glinting in his hand, far too heavy, far too real for someone his age. Before she could scream, before she could move, the gun erupted. The shot thundered through the classroom, tearing through her raised hand, the force driving her backward as the bullet plunged into her chest. Time slowed. The children screamed. Papers fluttered like snow in the air, speckled red as Abby collapsed to the floor. Her vision blurred, the walls spun, her lungs burned. She pressed her trembling hand to the wound, feeling warmth seep between her fingers. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard little feet scrambling, chairs clattering, cries calling her name. The smell of gunpowder mingled with crayons and spilled juice boxes, an unholy mix of childhood and carnage. The boy stood frozen, the gun still in his grasp, his eyes wide, as if realizing for the first time what he had done. The innocence that once filled the room evaporated in an instant, replaced by a chilling silence. Abby tried to crawl toward the door, her voice barely a whisper. "Get out." Run. Her students obeyed, tiny silhouettes fleeing the horror behind them. The bell rang faintly in the distance, its chime eerily calm against the chaos that had just unfolded. Outside, the cold January air bit at their faces as help rushed in. Inside, Abby's body lay motionless on the linoleum floor, her blood pooling beneath the reading table where she once taught spelling words and fairy tales. And as paramedics stormed through the halls, one truth echoed louder than any siren the system had failed her. Long before that blood hit the linoleum floor, the whispers had already begun. A quiet tension rippled through the halls of Richneck Elementary, uneasy glances, hushed voices, and a dread that no one dared to name. Teachers spoke in low tones, their words trembling on the edge of disbelief. "He has a gun," one said. "He said he wanted to hurt someone," said another. Each warning climbed the chain of command, desperate to be heard before it was too late. But as the clock ticked closer to disaster, the air itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the building knew the devil was already inside. But at the top of that chain stood Assistant Principal Ebony Parker, calm, dismissive, and frighteningly unmoved. She assured them it was nothing. "He's just a child," she said. "You're overreacting." And with that, the doors of fate swung open. No search was done, no phone call made. The boy, still armed, returned to class, his tiny fingers gripping a loaded weapon as if it were a toy. When the shot finally rang out, it wasn't just the sound of gunfire that shattered the air. It was the echo of every ignored warning, every moment of negligence that led to the breaking point. Abby Zwerner's scream carried through the corridors, a sound that would haunt those walls forever. The aftermath was chaos, police sirens painted red and blue against the pale winter sky. Parents flooded the parking lot, their faces pale with terror. And in the center of it all, Abby lay bleeding, her body torn apart by the consequences of indifference. 6 surgeries later, the bullet remained lodged near her ribs, a cold reminder of a system's failure. Her left hand, once used to write lessons and guide small hands across paper, was now twisted by pain, forever scarred. Weeks turned into months, and the headlines began to surface. The world learned what the school had ignored: 4 separate warnings, each dismissed as overreaction, each one a chance to stop the nightmare before it began. The truth spread like wildfire, leaving the community in disbelief. Then came the lawsuit. $40 million, not for greed, but for justice. Abby Zwerner, fragile yet unbroken, stood before the courtroom. Her voice didn't shake. She recounted every sound, every breath, every plea that went unanswered. The jury leaned forward, transfixed by her words, the tale of a teacher abandoned by the very system meant to protect her. The courtroom grew silent as evidence poured in: emails, testimonies, timelines. It wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. A chain of negligence woven together by arrogance and complacency. The faces of administrators paled as their decisions were laid bare for all to see. Outside, reporters gathered in the biting wind, their cameras trained on the courthouse steps. Inside, the haunting truth rang clear, a tragedy that could have been stopped, but wasn't. How does a 6-year-old get a gun? How does an adult ignore a cry for help? These questions hung in the air like ghosts, unanswered and unforgiving. And in that silence, one realization crept through every heart in the room. This was no mere accident of fate. This was a crime born of negligence, a horror written by human hands, signed in blood, and sealed with silence. The nation was still trembling from the echoes of gunshot in a Virginia classroom when another darkness began to crawl from the shadows, one that hid not in hallways, but beneath the glaring lights of basketball arenas. It started quietly, like a whisper under the roar of cheering fans, but what it revealed would send shockwaves through the world of professional sports. If you've made it this far, you already know. The quiet ones hide the darkest truths. Leave a comment. Let us know which story haunts you most, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next knock in the night. On October 23rd, 2025, the FBI stepped before cameras, their faces grim. Behind closed doors, the truth had been festering for years, a vast underground gambling network that stretched from the smoky backrooms of Las Vegas to the luxury penthouses of New York. 34 arrests, dozens of names. And among them, two that no one ever expected to see: NBA legend and Portland Trail Blazers coach Chauncey Billups and Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier. To the public, they were icons, men who embodied the dream of the game. But beneath the jerseys and handshakes, a darker allegiance had formed. Federal documents painted a chilling picture. Billups working hand in hand with Mafia families to organize high-stakes poker nights, tables fitted with rigged shuffling machines, and hidden lenses built to read cards. A game of deception played under soft jazz and expensive whiskey, where millions changed hands and losers never realized was even more insidious. Investigators uncovered encrypted messages, tiny details that could change the outcome of a game. A sprained ankle before it was announced, a player's minutes, a sudden substitution. Insider information passed to shadowy figures who bet fortunes on outcomes they already knew. Then came the date that sealed his fate. March 23rd, 2023. A night like any other, or so it seemed. The Miami Heat faced off in what should have been an unremarkable game, but within 9 minutes, Rozier left the court, claiming discomfort. Across the country, millions in suspicious bets shifted in real time, all pointing toward that single moment. The FBI traced the money, followed the signals, and found the threads that led back to the Mafia's web. Behind the scenes, the Bonanno, Gambino, and Genovese crime families smiled in the dark, their empire thriving within the heart of America's favorite sport. They had turned hardwood courts into stages of manipulation, transforming fair play into a rigged performance of greed and deceit. When the arrests came, the shock rippled through the nation like an aftershock from an unseen explosion. Fans wept. Commentators spoke in disbelief. How could heroes of the game be puppets in the Mafia's hand? But the deeper question was more haunting. How long had it been happening? How many games were poisoned by corruption? How many victories, once cheered by millions, were nothing more than orchestrated illusions? In FBI interrogation rooms, the walls hummed with tension. Names were named, deals were struck, and secrets began to bleed into the open. Every revelation peeled away another layer of glamour until only the rot remained. The story was no longer about sports. It was about betrayal, about how power, when mixed with greed, creates monsters who wear smiles and championship rings. And as the headlines screamed across the nation, one truth became clear. Even in the dazzling glow of fame, darkness finds its way in, because the devil doesn't need shadows when he can stand beneath the spotlight. The deeper the FBI dug, the darker the truth became. It wasn't just a gambling ring, it was a kingdom of corruption, ruled by ghosts in tailored suits. The Mafia's shadow seeped into every corner of the game. The Bonanno, Gambino, and Genovese families weren't just watching from the sidelines, they were calling the plays. Every shuffle of the cards, every bet placed, every missed shot on the court was another move in their sinister symphony. To the public, it looked like business as usual: cheering crowds, flashing lights, the squeak of sneakers on polished floors. But beneath that polished surface, the game was bleeding. The Mafia turned the NBA into their personal casino, laundering money through players, coaches, and hidden accounts. It wasn't sport anymore. It was theater, a carefully scripted illusion of competition, where greed wore the mask of glory. Agents uncovered encrypted bank transfers, offshore accounts, and secret meetings in dimly lit hotels. Every revelation dragged another name into the light. The League, once built on dreams and discipline, now reeked of betrayal. The boundary between sport and sin had vanished, leaving fans betrayed and the game itself gasping for air. But here's the chilling part. The corruption on the court and the tragedy in that Virginia classroom weren't so different after all. Picture it. On one side, a 6-year-old child gripping a gun too heavy for his hands, his innocence twisted by the failures of those meant to protect him. On the other, a millionaire athlete clutching poker chips, his conscience bought and sold by men in the shadows. Two worlds apart, yet bound by the same disease, the collapse of responsibility. In Newport News, it was the silence of adults who ignored the warnings. In the NBA, it was the silence of men who traded their integrity for power. Both stories spoke of neglect, one of duty, the other of morality. Both ended with innocence destroyed. It's almost poetic, in a cruel way. The teacher who trusted authority, the fans who trusted their heroes, both betrayed by systems that had long since rotted from within. The horror wasn't in the violence alone, it was in the realization that this is how evil hides. Not in darkness, but in daylight, in classrooms filled with laughter, in stadiums filled with cheers. The gunshot in a small Virginia school and the whispered deals in smoky Mafia rooms were echoes of the same truth. When accountability dies, chaos takes its throne. And as the curtain fell on both tragedies, one thing became undeniable: the monsters were never hiding under the bed. They were sitting behind desks, wearing suits, shaking hands, smiling for heavy with the weight of betrayal. Abby Swerner sat beneath the cold glow of the overhead lights, her left hand trembling as she clutched a photo of her students, faces once filled with laughter, now haunted by what they had seen. In that room, justice wasn't just a word, it was a battlefield. The school district tried to twist the law, to hide behind polished statements and paperwork. But the judge's gavel fell like thunder her lawsuit would stand. The fortress of negligence had finally cracked. As Abby's voice echoed through the courtroom, describing the day her life unraveled, the air grew thick with unease. Each word painted a picture too real to ignore: the screams of children, the ringing of a single gunshot, the betrayal of adults who looked away. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and for the first time the story of a teacher's survival became a symbol of something far greater: the fight for every educator who steps into a classroom, trusting the system to keep them safe. Across the country, another kind of reckoning was unfolding. The NBA, once the Temple of Glory, had become a crime scene of its own. Indictments dropped one after another, each name more shocking than the last. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. The glossy empire of professional basketball began to crumble, its heroes revealed as pawns in a mafia game that had been running for years. In FBI offices lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs, agents pored over documents and digital trails. What they found wasn't just gambling, it was control. Games rigged, outcomes manipulated, fortunes made and destroyed with a single whisper in a darkened room. Fans who once idolized these players now watched in disbelief as mugshots replaced highlight reels. Commentators spoke in hushed tones. The sound of the crowd was gone, replaced by the echo of chains and courtroom doors. The contrast was staggering. A teacher fighting for her life's worth, a league collapsing under the weight of its own deceit. Both symbols of how power, left unchecked, can devour everything it touches. Abby's courage became a light in the darkness, a reminder that justice doesn't whisper, it roars. And in those NBA courtrooms, justice came, dressed not in jerseys, but in indictments and handcuffs. The worlds of education and entertainment, so far apart, now shared a chilling truth. When responsibility dies, corruption thrives. By the time the final verdicts were read, and the headlines began to fade, one lesson lingered in the silence. Evil doesn't always come crashing through the door. Sometimes it smiles from the principal's office. Sometimes it walks across the court to shake your hand. The clock struck midnight, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Two worlds so far apart had become reflections in the same cracked mirror. In Virginia, a teacher's blood still stained the floor of a first-grade classroom. In the glimmering cities of the NBA, the shine of victory had been replaced by the stench of betrayal. The line between innocence and corruption had blurred beyond recognition. In one corner of the country, Abby Werner sat by her window, her bandaged hand resting on the table. Outside, the wind howled softly, carrying with it the echo of that gunshot, a sound she could never forget. The news still replayed it, dissecting every second of her pain, every failure that allowed a child to carry death into her classroom. She wasn't just a victim now. She was a survivor, a woman standing against an entire system that had looked the other way. Meanwhile, under the glaring lights of federal courtrooms in New York, the NBA's fallen idols faced their reckoning. Once cheered by millions, they now stood in silence, their heads bowed as prosecutors recited the evidence numbers, messages, secret meetings in hotel rooms, money wired through offshore accounts. The Mafia's reach had been long, and their greed insatiable. The crowd they once played for was gone. Now only the hum of fluorescent lights remained, flickering like the dying pulse of their legacy. It was here that the stories converged not in geography, but in spirit, because what tied them together wasn't the crime itself, but the cause, the quiet, deadly absence of accountability. When those in charge close their eyes, monsters are born, whether it's a 6-year-old finding a gun at home or a millionaire selling integrity for a bet. The result is the same innocence destroyed. The camera of fate zoomed out, showing two different stages of human tragedy. A classroom drenched in blood and a basketball court dripping with deceit. In both places, the lights had dimmed and the shadows had taken over. The walls seemed to whisper, echoing the cries of the fallen and the lies of the corrupted, merging into one unholy chorus. And as the darkness spread, it felt almost alive, crawling, watching. The whispers of the Mafia mingled with the echo of Abby's last terrified cry. The corruption in the boardrooms matched the cowardice in the school offices. Different crimes, same sin. The refusal to act when it mattered most. And in that shared silence, the darkness grew teeth, feeding on fear and greed, until it swallowed everything pure. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked open. Not in a school, not in an arena, but in the human soul. And something unspeakable stepped through. And as dawn broke over Virginia and New York, the headlines told two separate stories. But beneath the ink, they shared one truth. When power chooses silence, darkness takes the microphone. So the next time you walk past a school gate, or sit down to watch a game believing in fairness and virtue, remember the monsters don't always hide under the bed. Sometimes they sit behind desks. Sometimes they wear suits. Sometimes they smile for the cameras. Responsibility is the only wall that keeps the shadows from crawling in. And when that wall cracks, when people turn away, the horror doesn't knock, it walks right in. Because in the end, evil doesn't just live in nightmares. It breathes in the silence of those who should have spoken, and in the greed of those who never stopped taking. Two worlds, two crimes, one haunting truth. The darkness always finds its way home.